Hi, and welcome to Vibes Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by Vibes Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the Vibes Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the Vibes Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
Yo, welcome back to the Vibes Daily Podcast. It is day 213 of our year-long series we have titled Devoted as we journey through the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. We are so glad that you are with us today. I am back again, joined by my wife, Victoria, as we are here to continue our journey through Isaiah, which is the book we are currently in. About halfway through this book.
Yes.
Today, we'll pick up at chapter 33 here today. But yeah, we'll jump right in. Hopefully, again, this will help. Bring your Bible, journal, notes, anything to read along with us as we talk a little bit about what Isaiah is continuing to do. So we left off, I should say, on Isaiah 32 yesterday, where God is kind of talking about this kingdom that will come, and particularly what this king will look like. And then we get to 33 and we're kind of back to a little bit more of some destruction warnings. What jumped out to you here in chapter 33?
As I was looking over it again, it jumped out to me this woe. I think my commentary in my Bible keeps pointing out what number woe this is in this book. And so this is the sixth and the last time there is a woe to a certain nation or something, like in the oncoming of their destruction.
Okay.
And in the NLT, it says the message about Assyria. It's clear that it's Assyria, but in the CSB, it doesn't really have that as my title. But the commentary here does say that they think this has to do with Assyria during the time where they came with their entourage to King Hezekiah and were just being blasphemous and speaking against the Lord there. And so I think that was helpful for me because it did put into context this first verse here. This woe, you destroyer never destroyed, you traitor never betrayed. It was this nation that was just conquering, right? That but had not seen its downfall yet. And so that kind of putting the framework in my mind, oh yeah, Syria was big time, big time. But we see as the pronouncement that Isaiah has and that we see later on, they eventually fall, right? So that was the first thing that came to me.
I'm not sure I got exactly that. And not just because, you just did more research, kind of thinking of the context and the historical application of this. And again, I know we'll get into a little bit more of when Assyria came to Hezekiah and them kind of when we get to chapter 36. But I think I was just really struck a lot more by what God said in this prophecy. There were pieces in verse 8 where kind of just describes this desert that'll kind of be barren and stuff, because when I contrast that with chapter 35, which we'll get to, kind of the desert rejoices. So it was kind of just interesting there, seeing some differences. But I think the part that really jumped out was starting at verse 10, where I just feel like the Lord is just I don't know. He's now I will rise up, says the Lord. Now I will lift myself up. Now I will be exalted. And I don't know, there's just this, first of all, really gangster
It is.
phrase by God for the record, okay? But secondly, just I don't know, there's something one saddened to me, like or that saddens me just about the fact that God's like, I have to exalt myself, I have to lift myself up, right? Like, because you guys won't lift me up.
Right.
Like, you won't exalt me, you won't worship me. And he's just like, I will rise up, I will lift myself up, I will be exalted. And it reminds me, it just points out to me like God doesn't need us. Right? Like
At all.
He invites us to worship him. He invites us to exalt him, to lift him up.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually need us. And I feel like that's when he inserted himself and said, I'll do it myself.
I was just about to say that. I'm going to do it myself. I just love it though. Like, I just love it. Like, he's so beastie at times.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. That jumped out to me in this chapter. Just that, like, him just deciding he was going to kind of take it on his own. But was there anything else in 33 that jumped out to you?
Yeah, backing up a little bit, I was actually stopping at verse 2. It was like, Lord, be gracious to us. We wait for you. Be our strength every morning and our salvation in the time of trouble. And I think this stuck out to me because this is one of the situations, if this indeed is about Assyria, this is one of the situations where, like, the people waited, right, for the Lord to act. Like, they did not talk back to the Assyrians. They went to the temple, and Hezekiah prayed, as we'll see again later, that we read before previously when we actually read the first encounter. But and then, like, just waiting for the Lord. I love that part. But then, like you said, when you pulled that out for us, that, like, the Lord said to them, like, I'm gonna rise up. Like, oh, who are you talking to? Oh, you talking to me? Like, and the Lord, like, started combating the Assyrians and saying that, like, for his own name's sake, he was going to rise up. And so I do appreciate that. And like you said, that when he's like, says he's going to do something, like, it's like to completion. Like, it wasn't like the highways are like sprinkled with people, like, like deserted, like, like, traveling has ceased. Not slow, but it ceased. Like, all these things, I just feel like when he's gonna do it to these different nations, it's like, I'm gonna do it to completion, and it's gonna be noticeable.
Yeah, it's good. I think verses 15 and 16 also stuck out to me. It just, it tells you, the one who lives righteously and speaks rightly, who refuses profit from extortion, whose hand never takes a bride, who stops his ears from listening to murderous plots, and shuts his eyes against evil schemes. He will dwell on the heights. His refuge will be the rocky fortress. His food provided, his water assured.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I just, anything that jumps out or anything that like speaks to what it looks like to be righteous, I tend to just pay attention to. Because I mean, I would like to be. I pray the Lord sees me as righteous one day. And so, I kind of look to those things. So, it just stuck out to me. Refusing profit from extortion, not taking bribes, not listening to murderous plots or schemes. Like, okay, some of the things I should just pay attention to.
Yeah. And then it just goes on to say, like, the things that you'll forget or won't see anymore, right? Like, you'll see God, the King, in his beauty, but then, like, you're not gonna remember, like, you're not gonna see the accountant, the tribute collector, like, where's one who spied out your defenses? Like, you never see these people with this foreign language that used to be over you. And so, yeah, I think I like the contrast there that Isaiah has going on there.
Yeah.
Like, God's going to show up for you, and then, like, and bless, but then also, like, he's going to deal with the people who's coming up against them. So, yeah, that's good. I like it.
Okay. Well, that takes us 34. And in 34, we get some more judgment.
Isaiah has a tall order. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it is like judgment after judgment is sprinkling in some blessings for his people of salvation and redemption. But
Yeah, I mean, this one, again, everybody getting some, right? Verse
Yeah.
2 is the first thing that jumped out to me is the Lord is angry with all the nations, furious with all the armies. I was just like, yeah, all is all, and that's all that all means, right? Like, it's just like coming after everybody. But yeah, what jumped out to you about what was said to them, and even as you kind of keep going through to Nation of Edom.
Yeah, I think that was I think it was interesting that like this imagery of like the stars in the sky will dissolve in verse 4. The sky will roll up like a scroll and the stars will all wither as leaves. Like I think that imagery was interesting to me. It definitely reminds me of like end times type stuff. But this verse 5, of course, was just like it's so vivid. Like when I say this is like gory and gruesome, like you don't need no John Wick here. Like you got the Lord talking about when my sword has drunk its full, right? Or like in how the NLT says like, and when my sword has finished its work in the heavens, it will fall upon Edom. The nations are marked for destruction. The sword of the Lord is drenched with blood and covered with fat. And I'm like, Eesh.
Yep.
Like he went to town on him. But yeah, like he's just like, yeah, I'm finna make my own sacrifice up in here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like a day of vengeance, and I had to remind myself. Of course, I keep forgetting like where did Edom come from? But the descendants of Esau. I don't know why that never sticks. It never sticks, right? But Jacob and Esau, descendants is Edom, right? And how like Edom, I guess the controversy here that I was reading about was this like when Assyria went and started to capture Israel, not Judah but Israel, right, and Samaria and stuff, that like Edom was just sitting by watching. And then there is some like thought that they potentially helped like with the plunder and stuff, that they like went and plundered their own goods, right, from the Israelites. And so it was kind of like, yeah, these are supposed to be your brothers. Like, these are your brother cousins, right? Like, but you just sat back and watched them, like, get walked off by this foreign land and was trying to profit off of it yourself by grabbing plunder and stuff. And so, then I was reading up on it. I feel like that stuck out to me because I was wondering, like, why is the Lord so hot? Like, why is he so serious about Edom? Like, what did they do? And so, but yeah, like on verse 8, it says, for the Lord has a day of vengeance, a time paying back Edom. And then in verse 10 in the NLT, it says, this judgment of Edom will never end. I was just like, yeesh.
Yeah. Yeah, see, you asked a lot of questions
I did.
that I didn't even think through because honestly, man, just reading Isaiah, I felt like everybody was getting something. So I was like, they had to do something.
It's
like,
right. It's rightfully so.
Yeah, I was. It's in my mind, I was like, everybody gets some. So, whatever they did, they had to do something. I didn't even take time to consider what they may have done. So we all getting it. I felt like they was talking to me too. I wasn't even living at the time.
I was over here looking at my own sins, like, what I do, Lord?
Yeah.
What was it earlier?
A sword coming to me next. This is the way I looked at it. So yeah, I don't know. It didn't jump out to me, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of imagery with animals in this that I just thought was interesting. Like, just because, to your point, like, despite the fact that like Isaiah, as you said, he had a tall task, right? Like he has so much judgment that he had to render upon people. I also had to give him a little bit of like props for his creativity because I feel like his message was still unique for like each nation, right? Like just what he calls out. Like he didn't just repeat the same judgments and say like, this was going to happen to you. Like he was very specific and unique with each of them. So like I said, the ones that like, it just jumped out to me that when you get to kind of verses, probably starts in 14 really. The desert creatures will meet hyenas, and one wild goat will call to another. Indeed, the night birds will stay there and will find a resting place. Sand partridges will make their nests there. They will lay and hatch their eggs and will gather their broods under the shadows. Indeed, the birds of prey will gather there. Like, I was just like, I don't know, just we went from like weather references. We've gone from literal war references. We've gone from like, floods and fires to like animals to just, I don't know, it's just so interesting to me how creative he was in how he described, what was coming for these countries.
Yeah, because it was all getting the same stuff.
Yeah, they was all gonna die.
Yeah.
And be conquered.
Destroyed.
Ultimately. Well, as we kind of go into chapter 35, we actually get a little bit more of some hope as we are joined by our favorite guest, Judah, who's on our podcast with us here. But yeah, chapter 35, there's this message about this remnant. In this case, they refer to them as the ransomed, right? Or just those that will kind of return. And so there's, I don't know, a little bit of a message of hope here in 35, which, is a little different than a lot of what we've been reading in Isaiah. What sticks out to you about how 35 is described?
Yeah. I think it was interesting because we start talking about earlier, like the stripping down of Lebanon and Carmel. But in verse 2, it is talking about like the glory that Lebanon had, the splendor of Carmel, like it'll be given to them, right? They're like, I'm going to build you up, but like, I'm gonna make you like the best of the best, right? Because Lebanon is known for their like trees and all that stuff, and some of that beautiful stuff. So yeah. Like
I said, especially when you just get contrasted with 33, right? That's kind of a little bit what I was referring to. You see the glory of Lebanon there back in 33 verse 9. The land mourns and withers. Lebanon is ashamed and wilted, right? You get the splendor of Carmel and Shannon in verse 2, but back in verse 9, Shannon is like a desert. Bashan and Carmel shake off their leaves, right? So it's like, it's interesting just to see the contrast there, that now all of a sudden there's glory and there's splendor in these places that were just barren and deserted, right?
Yeah, and then the opening of the eyes of the blind, right, and the ears of the deaf, like the prophets and stuff that they said that was blinding, like the Lord will be speaking to them again. I think that was really encouraging too.
Yeah.
And then there goes your jackals and stuff.
More animals. Yeah.
I think it's like ties it all together, like the last few chapters.
Yeah, it does. It's just like, it just really feels like just a contrast, like just to kind of show you how different this particular return is, right? This is verse 10 that tells us that like the Redeemer will walk on it and the ransom of the Lord will return and come to Zion with singing, crowned with unending joy. Joy and gladness will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee, right? So like this season when they return is just going to be so different than anything that kind of took place beforehand.
But which is interesting to me, and because when they actually do get back to like rebuilding the temple and the walls and stuff, like it doesn't look like that, right? It doesn't look like that and feel like that. And so there's so many times I'm just like, well, I can see why they were discouraged, like when the exiles actually returned from Syria, Babylon, conquering them, and they started doing this work that they thought that it was going to be like this beautiful restoration, but like not so much. I mean, and even just recall, right, when we went back to, I think this is Ezra, where they built the foundation of the temple, and like some of them are like rejoicing, but like others are like sad and crying. Right, to your point. So there was definitely some who were conflicted, who weren't quite as rejoicing as Isaiah kind of predicts here. Well, 36, which is where we end today, we'll kind of pick up this story a little bit more tomorrow. We actually kind of get some history that looks very similar to 2 Kings, looks very similar to 2 Chronicles, right? And the story of essentially when the king of Assyria sends this messenger to Judah to essentially intimidate them, give them an opportunity to surrender,
and yeah, they hold out. What jumped out to you at 36? I mean, we've read this twice now, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is, yeah, we've read it twice now. Anything stand out to you this time around?
Well, just overall, I think we at least mentioned back then when we were reading it, this like the fact that like King Hezekiah went to Isaiah and Isaiah's name was like in that text. I think it's just amazing to see it actually show up in Isaiah's records too, because it makes sense. It's like, yeah, you were there. Like, yeah, like you know all about this story. Just once again, just how the Bible is just linked and connected, and totally different writer, totally different, like you know, but you still see him show up where he's supposed to. So that's crazy to me. But yeah, I think that stood out, and then this actually helped me. It reminded me of when the Lord last week was talking about how he was going to exalt the court secretary or something, like you know, and I was just like, oh yeah, like I feel like that was really interesting too, because it's like, yeah, he was here at this moment too when all of them together. It was a Shibna and stuff. But yeah, so that was really good. And then but yeah, I think which just stuck out to me, sorry, I'm talking in generalities here, we can go in deeper later, but was just how similar the story was. It was like verbatims, like word for words here, that like I was like, wow, this is really like, I feel like I'm actually really reading the same thing. Okay, what stuck out to you? Did you notice differences?
No, necessarily. I didn't, and I think it speaks to a couple things, like one, how these books are composed, right, or compiled, I should say. That oftentimes is believed that a lot of these books have kind of multiple contributors or authors to kind of bring stuff together, and so it's possible that even though these are the writings of Isaiah, that Isaiah didn't necessarily write every word written down here, right? As people kind of put together these things, so it is possible that you're almost looking at the exact same story in both places, because of that, or at least one that is copied from the other, essentially. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely the consistency there was interesting. As you said, it's always cool to see, it's always cool to see the Bible just like read it together, right? In those ways, I think is always interesting.
And helpful.
Yeah, just helpful. And it confirms and affirms even some of the like validity of it, right? In a lot of ways, for those that may have questions in that regard. But yeah, no, I just think specifically we literally went through the story twice on this podcast, so it's not a whole lot to pull out of from it specifically. But I did just, one of the things stuck out was specifically like when they, there's some of the lies, or not even just lies, some of the ways that like they really challenge the people of Judah, like, I don't know, just some temptation. Like we've talked about before, how hard it is to trust this God that we can't see over like what's right in front of us, and like how there's so much temptation oftentimes to like take the word of our friend, or to trust in like our finances or our success, like these things that are tangible in front of us, that like when I think about, man, this king, according to this, like this king had already captured like the fortified cities in Judah at this point, right? It's not like he just sent a messenger and nothing had happened. Like he's already captured some cities in Judah, and he sent this messenger, and like I can very much see the temptation of the people of Judah to say like, nah, honestly, he gives us a pretty good deal. He says like 10,000 of us can like ride with him. I think it's like 10,000. He 2,000
horses. If
you provide the horses, we provide the men. So a lot of us get to like just join your army. 2,000. Thank you. Verse 8, right? And we're gonna make a deal here. He even tells us that we get to go back to our own. Like everybody gets to have their own land back, essentially, right? Like Verse 16, it's like, don't listen to Hezekiah, for this is what the king of Assyria says. Make peace with me and surrender to me. Then every one of you may eat from his own vine and his own fig tree and drink water from his own cistern until I come and take you away to a land like your own land. A land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, right? Like,
It sounds amazing.
it sounds pretty tempting.
Just saying.
That's pretty, and we don't have to fight. You said peace. We surrender. Nobody dies.
Nobody dies.
We get to have this beautiful land.
Live in bliss.
Like,
Buy some horses we didn't have.
that sounds like a pretty good deal.
It does. It's real tempting. Like, if fleshly speaking, it's real tempting.
So, like, I have to give them credit, like, because essentially in verse 21 tells us they kept silent. They didn't say anything, for the king's command was don't answer him. Right? Like, they kept silent. They could have easily just been like, yeah, I'll take that deal.
Old Victoria would have.
I mean, regular nowadays, Eric might have. I don't want to give myself that much credit.
You are so right. New Victoria is definitely tempted.
Like, again, I would love to believe that I would have the faith and the boldness to be like, God, I trust you in this.
Yeah, but when it comes to especially like our family, right? Because we're talking about their families are at stake here, right? Like all their livelihood. And so it's like, okay, so do I stand on firm on the word of the Lord and possibly get burned alive?
Yeah.
Or with my family,
Right.
Or do I take them up on this deal and ensure that like I can at least go into captivity with my family into this pretty land?
Yeah. And, if the future lands behind us are captured, that's not my problem. That's their problem. Like, we going to be in peace. And, I mean, it reminds me a little bit, and I know we're kind of at the end here, and I want to bring it to a close, but it reminds me of, when we were younger, there was that, kind of tragic school shooting at Columbine High School in Colorado.
Yeah.
And there was this story that came out of it. Again, much of it is like urban legend versus like true is it's kind of irrelevant. But there was a story that came out of it about, this young lady in the class that essentially was told to like denounce Jesus or she would die. Right. And so she's so renowned because essentially she refused to do so, for her life. And it reminds me of that. But I think to your point, like it's one thing if it was just me. But like, it's tough for me to like, no, like, yeah, you're going to kill me and all my kids.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to take my whole family for this. And like, it we'll get to some other stories later. Like when we get to Daniel, this kind of sticks out to me with like Nebuchadnezzar and some of the stuff he asked people to do and things. But like,
Definitely.
It's, again, just, I'm not trying to judge anybody, right? For the fact that
Not at
like
all.
they bow before a statue instead of being thrown in the fiery furnace, right? Or that they did not pray instead of being thrown in the lion's den, right? Like when they were faced with those kind of threats, that they just kind of obliged and said, forgive me, Lord. Like,
Yeah. Pardon this one.
pardon
please.
this one, like pass. Like, cause again, I could see the people have done something like, hey, God, forgive us, give us grace, but yeah, we just gonna go ahead and make this deal. Especially when so many of them did before, right? So I don't know. That just stuck out to me. Like I said, just when I saw what he was offering, just that temptation really stuck out to me this time around.
Yeah. Definitely.
But I will continue to see a little bit more of how this story plays out, because we'll get a couple more chapters of history here from Hezekiah and Isaiah as well. We'll pick up at chapter 37 tomorrow. But in the meantime, again, hopefully this is helpful as you wrestle through this text and you take time to read it and understand. If you have your own thoughts, please share them with us. You can do so in the chat, YouTube, Facebook. Send us messages in our app, whatever makes the most sense. But hope that you'll join this conversation and encourage one another in this. But appreciate you joining us here at the Vibes Daily Podcast. We will see you tomorrow. Until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the Vibes Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the Vibes Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.